What is going on, guys? How are we doing? How are we doing today? Welcome, everybody, to Unit 8 CRAM session. I'll wait a few minutes to let everybody kind of get on in here. I'm sporting my brand new Fiveable t-shirt. Very excited about it. I've also got a very fun Yes We CRAM sticker as well. It's all very good stuff. Very exciting. I hope you guys are doing well on this beautiful Saturday. And today's going to be, I think most people can agree, one of the more interesting units of AP Euro, which is the World Wars and the Interwar Years. Certainly something that I can talk on and on and on about, and probably something that most of you guys know a decent amount about as well. So I do have a poll question, as always, to start things off for us. And that is, what country did not experience wide-scale revolution throughout or some point in the 19th century? Okay, what country? So a few things before we get us started for today. First and foremost, we do have the Unit 5 stream that kind of we had some technical difficulties. My internet kept cutting in and out. That has been re-recorded and uploaded to the Fiveable website. So if you go back to just like watch that replay of Unit 5, you can see and find the re-recorded video that I did in there. Okay, it's about an hour. It's the same amount. It's like the same length as a normal stream, as a normal CRAM session, but I did cover the entirety of Unit 5. So go and check that out. That got uploaded, I think, a few days ago. So if you haven't seen it yet, go and check it out. All right, let's take a look at the poll. All right, so what country did not experience wide-scale revolutionary activity in the 19th century? You guys were absolutely right here when you said Britain. Britain is kind of one of the few countries, really one of the only countries in Europe in the 19th century that does not really have to deal with this wide-scale revolutionary activity that places like Germany and France and Austria were experiencing. A lot of this had to do with the fact that Britain was a very kind of homogenous state in terms of nationalities. While they are going to come up against, especially in Ireland. Ireland is, for those that know our geography today, we know that Northern Ireland exists. We know that Ireland is going to experience a nationalistic movement kind of throughout the 20th century, and they certainly are dealing with that in the 19th century as well. However, it's not to the same type of scale that a place like France experiences revolution. So one, they are very homogenous, but the bigger reason is that Britain is one of the few countries in Europe that really looks to embrace kind of these new and changing ideas, and really looks to compromise with the most I want to use the word radical, but I don't know if that's necessarily fair, but definitely the groups that are the loudest, right? So we're talking about like people like our liberals. We're talking about even like the working class people who will eventually be we would tag on with like socialists or communists. And not to say that Britain wasn't necessarily like, moving my camera down a little bit. There we go. Wasn't necessarily dealing with people like this, or having to necessarily deal with the potential threat of a revolutionary activity in their country. It just wasn't to the same type of scale, and they never really experience it actually come to fruition in any sort of major way. And so in the revolutions of 1848, this is a really good example of this in action, right? Really, we don't see the revolutions of 1848 spread across the English Channel into England. While in mainland Europe, they're all over the place. We see the revolutions of 1848 touching on pretty much every single country in Europe, every single major country in Europe anyway. So really, Britain is able to skirt this populist revolution. They're able to skirt and avoid any sort of wide-scale revolution because of the measures they take in modernizing their country, both the economy and the government, as well as adopting, you know, some more liberal measures in order to appease the more radical liberals in Britain. All right, so let's go ahead and jump on into things, because this is, as always, going to be kind of a longer unit. And there's a lot to talk about, and there's a lot to cover, and certainly a lot of stuff that I can get lost. I can kind of get lost in the weeds a little bit and spend a lot of time, especially when we talk about World War I. But let's jump into it. Go to presenter view here. We turn on closed captions. Size. Boom. All right. There we go. There we go. Bada bing, bada boom. Here we are. All right. Good stuff. All right, guys. All right. So let us rock here. So Unit 8, if I can get this. Unit 8 is really all focused on the world wars and the interwar years in Europe. And you know, there's a lot that we can talk about here. There's a lot that we can also kind of skip over. The reality is that the world wars are really interesting in regards to like AP European history. And the reason why I say that is because this is really, in a lot of ways, a topic that we as a kind of just people, as you know, as Americans, know a decent amount. It's covered a lot in early history classes. There is a lot of oh, my video, hold on, my video just cut out, guys, excuse me. Let me see. Oh, here we go. All right, sorry about that. Okay. So the you know, the world wars are in a really interesting spot in regards to like American history and what we learn in middle school and then even in early high school, and that we learn a lot about the world wars, and we learn a lot about kind of America's role in it, but also just like the general history of the wars themselves. And so in regards to like what you need to know for the AP exam, and again, I'm putting on my, you know, Steven from College Board name tag right here. There really isn't a lot of like minute detail that you really need to get bogged down with. Another big reason is that in reality, you know, we are in period 4, and this is something I haven't touched on a lot in the streams. I'm going to talk about it a lot in the next 3 streams that we do, or not the next 3 streams that we do, but after we get done with the units, when we do the 3 streams on short answer questions, LEQ and DBQ. The way that the AP kind of class and course is broken up is into 9 units, but also into 4 different periods. And this is kind of an old school thing. It's still used, but it's not. But really, College Board is trying to move towards this unit system where they have stuff broken up into units as opposed to periods. It's kind of weird. It's not something that we really need to concern ourselves too much with. But when it comes to short answer questions, you're guaranteed to get a certain amount of short answer questions from each period, and you're guaranteed to get choices for your LEQ from different periods. And the periods just describe time periods that we learn about in the class. I know this is all really kind of convoluted, especially if you've never heard about this before. If you know the periods in AP European history, you're probably like, yeah, I get this. But we'll talk more about it with the short answer questions, or with the free response questions. But one thing why I say all this is because we are now with the start of this unit in period 4. Period 4 lasts for unit 8 and unit 9, starts with World War I. And there's a less emphasis put on period 4 than there is in really any of the other 3 time periods that we study, any of the other 3 periods in European history, or in AP European history. So with these last 2 units, they're important to know, but I think really here more than anything else, it's really just important to know the concepts. Okay, so all that being said, you know, I've talked a lot. Let's go ahead and just jump on in to the actual content, and we'll see what I mean as we go through. So first of all, you guys know the deal. This is being recorded. If you don't want to see your name show up, make sure you have that changed before you view. If you haven't already followed Think Fiveable on all the social medias, or Fiveable on all the social medias, it's at Think Fiveable. They I talk about this all the time. They really post really good stuff there, especially on the Discord. It's awesome. The Fiveable Twitter just retweeted one of my tweets, so if you want to go follow me, check out the Twitter and see what they retweeted yesterday. I was posting about my my brand new shirt and all the cool swag that they sent me. So check out the social medias and the Discord, and see what they got going on there. So this is kind of what our schedule looks like for up through the rest of the unit coverage, the unit cram sessions, and then into the free response tips and tricks on the 18th. So tomorrow is going to be trivia from 9 to 9:30. We're going to have our unit 9 cram session on Friday of next week from 8 to 9 p.m. I know it's a Friday, but if you can tune in, please do. We're going to have our trivia the next day from 7:30 to 8 p.m. And then on the 18th, we are going to be starting our first of the free response questions, tips, and tricks. The first one is going to be predominantly focused on short answer questions. I'm still really working out how I'm going to do this, but my plan is I'm going to push out a sample free response question onto the Discord, and I might also, I'll probably also have it have a link to it on the end of the Unit 9 PowerPoint that we do, that you guys can do beforehand, and then we can cover as a we can cover it together on the 18th. Okay, but I'll have more information about that on next Friday when we do Unit 9. Okay, so this is our this is kind of our schedule for today. We're going to do our intro to Unit 8. We are going to then cover World War I, then the Russian Revolution. We'll briefly touch on that a little bit, the Interwar Years, and then World War II. So a lot to cover in a single unit. That's definitely a lot of stuff. But we'll get through we'll get through it. We'll talk about the big highlights here, and I'll kind of talk about how to study Unit 8 in a more meaningful way. All right, so let's jump into it. Let's jump into our first big topic here, which is World War I. So when we last left off, we were talking about how Europe was kind of in this, this really big changing, growing, just big change period full of change, right? I mean, that's the only way I can think to describe it. You have the Industrial Revolution. You have all of these social movements with socialism, political feminism, the rise of things like anarchism, the rise of things like modern conservatism, the rise of modern liberalism and nationalism. All of these big changes that are happening. And the reality is that Europe is moving really, really quickly. And the way that I kind of like to describe it is when we think about Europe right up to the start of World War I, it's almost like a big Jenga tower. And the Jenga tower, every time we see change, every time we see new social, political, industrial change, we see a Jenga piece be taken out and put on top. And eventually, that tower is going to collapse. Okay, and that's kind of what happens in Europe, is you have all of this buildup, all of this change, and there was no real release. There was no real way that a lot of issues and problems were being addressed, and it's eventually just going to all boil over. Okay. Now, the war itself lasts from 1914 to 1918. Touched on every single part of the world, sans Antarctica. but every single continent either sent soldiers to the battle, either sent soldiers to the war, either had fighting actually on their land. You know, this was a war that touched every single part of the world. And when we're describing why it started, there's kind of like two ways, and this is true with like pretty much every single major event, right? We have our long-term causes and we have our short-term causes. The long-term causes, you guys actually, if you've taken a history class or a world history class before, you guys probably remember Main, M-A-I-N. Okay, Main, which stands for militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. And because I'm annoying, I did not put those in this order in that order on this PowerPoint. But militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism are our four big long-term causes for World War I. Then we have some smaller short-term causes. Really, the one that most people know about is the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. That was certainly the big catalyst that sets off this big chain of events that starts World War I. But we also definitely know about, we also definitely have to recognize the fact that there was crisis that was happening on the continent besides just the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. But let's dig into each of these different long-term causes and then and talk about how they were causes for a world war. Let's start first with nationalism, because I think this is the one that probably makes the is probably one of the most impactful, and was definitely the most impactful for, you know, the thing like the smaller causes, the short-term causes. But nationalism was really it went from this sort of like idea and a rallying point for people into a way that it could be used as a tool for control. People, European leaders were weaponizing nationalism as a way to gain support from their people. No one did this better, no one did this better than, I don't think more makes sense there. Anyway, no one did this better than Otto von Bismarck with German unification, right? We know that German unification at its core was a conservative movement that was wrapped around nationalism. And the reality is that Bismarck could care less about the German nationalist struggles. He really wanted to use nationalism as a tool of control. And so, kind of in the same way that we would see like religion being used as a tool of control, it becomes weaponized. It becomes very black and white. It becomes like you're either with us, you're against us. And this is going to lead to a very, very militant stance when it comes to nationalism, or a militant focus of nationalism. Now, excuse me. Now, one of the things it does also do is it frames other countries as like not only economic and military rivals, but also like nationalistic rivals. You know, we see this in places, especially when we get into like World War II with the rise of like Hitler and Mussolini and these fascist rulers. That's what they're going to do. They're going to frame these other places as getting in the way of their nationalistic expansion. Now, the alliance system similarly is going to lead to a lot of growing tensions. This is a lot of the alliance system again gets orchestrated by Otto von Bismarck, where he is going to create these series of pretty complex alliances in order to achieve German unification, and you know, among other things too. German unification being the big one, but among other things. Now Bismarck is a pretty gosh darn good statesman, and does a really good job of controlling and keeping these alliances in check. But once that he gets ousted, once he's gone, then the alliance system starts to get really tricky. And what we ended up seeing here is we see the creation of these two separate alliances. The first being the Triple Alliance. The Triple Alliance being Austria-Hungary, Germany, and Italy. This is, you know, really pretty much it kind of makes sense that these countries would ally themselves together. They all share borders. They also share relative common interests. And really it kind of just does make sense. But of course, the issue is that Bismarck was the glue that was holding this Triple Alliance together initially. And when Bismarck is fired by Kaiser Wilhelm II, who I say this every time I teach World War I, we can never really blame World War I on a singular person. It's a series of complex events and a series of complex mistakes. But really, if we could blame it on a single person, it's Kaiser Wilhelm II. He makes a lot of really stupid decisions that just really like make things go from bad to really, really, really bad. Now, one of the things that Kaiser Wilhelm II is going to do is that he does let the treaty with Russia that Bismarck had pretty much orchestrated, he lets it expire. And this is obviously, if we know anything about World War I, is going to be a big issue, right? Because this is one of the two fronts that Germany is going to end up having to fight on. Kaiser Wilhelm II also starts an arms race with Britain. He looks at the British Navy and he looks at the British military, and he's like, you know, we want to have the best Navy in the world. We want to be the strongest economic power in the world. And so he starts an arms race specifically centered around navies and building up a Navy. He starts an arms race with Britain. This is going to lead to mass militarism as well, right? Which is another one of our long-term causes. Militarism, the building up of countries' militaries. Now, if we're thinking about imperialism, we know that imperialism, similarly to the Age of Exploration, where we saw similar stuff happening, imperialism is going to create a scenario where you have lots of countries battling out for their own special interest, their own particular interest, and they're stepping on each other's toes. We saw this happen all the time in places like the Caribbean, in places like Central and South America, between these countries that were colonizing there during the Age of Exploration. Same thing is going to happen during the Age of Imperialism, right? Where we see countries duking it out, even if it's more of like a stalemate Cold War type situation over particular areas of land. We see this happen with the Moroccan crisis, several different Moroccan crises. Actually, there was 3 of them. But really, the issue here is that Germany was attempting to kind of weaken French control of Morocco by inciting a revolution. This leads to a massive international crisis. All of these countries get involved. The United States gets involved. And, the end result of this is not war, but it very well could have been. And out of this, the growing alliances of the Triple Alliance, the kind of growing tensions because of imperialism and militarism, we see the formation of the Triple Entente. And the Triple Entente is predominantly Russia and France, but also Britain is like, I need someone to help back me up here. I'll join up with you guys. And we see the formation of these two mass alliances, right? Britain, France, and Russia versus Germany, Italy, and Austria-Hungary. And now this is really where we have a situation that is just going to blow up, right? And the thing that really blows it up is the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand here. So, the assassination of the Archduke is a crazy story, and really, it's one that shouldn't have never led to World War. It was really an assassination that was, there were assassinations that were happening all the time at this point, especially in the Balkan states, which were incredibly volatile. This is not something I touched on a lot right here. Mostly because of lack of time, but the Balkan states, which are, modern day Greece, Croatia, Serbia, Bulgaria, Romania, so on and so on, that area of southeastern Europe at this point was incredibly volatile. And a lot of that had to do with the nationalistic movements that were happening within the Balkan states. A lot of these Balkan states break away from the Ottoman Empire, and then they kind of, Serbia kind of emerges as the most dominant Balkan state. They really start butting heads with Austria because Austria does not want them to grow in power. It would infringe on their power in Central Europe, and really this all kind of comes to head with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Now, Franz Ferdinand was the heir to the Austrian throne. He was kind of notoriously very, very anti-Slav, which the Slavic peoples were made up the majority of the peoples in the Balkan states, as well as several or a sizable population of Russia as well. Now, Archduke Franz Ferdinand is visiting the city of Sarajevo, which is at this point a pretty volatile place, and he's actually kind of advised, like, hey, don't go to Sarajevo. It's going to be a bad move. And he goes there anyway. He goes to tour the city, and this kind of nationalistic terrorist organization called the Black Hand hears about this and plans to assassinate him. And like I said, assassinations at this time were not uncommon. This was like a pretty common thing that was happening, especially in Eastern Europe. I mean, this is happening all the time in Russia at this point as well. And so while for us, we are like, that's crazy, they're going to assassinate the Archduke. Again, I can't understate this. This was not supposed to lead to a world war, but it's all of these other events that do eventually lead to it. Long story short, a kind of like symphony of errors leads to the Archduke and his wife being shot by a member of the Black Hand, Garvillo, I think that's his first name, Princip, and she shoots the Archduke and his wife. They die almost instantly, and just like that, the heir to the Austrian throne is dead. Now, when this happens in June of 1914, the rest of Europe is like, okay, yeah, that was bad. Austria, do what you got to do. We're not going to intervene. Okay, pretty much the rest of Europe was like, look, we get it. They killed your heir, and you got to address that in some way. But the advice that Germany gives Austria is like, look, if you're going to do something, do it now, because you have the sympathy of Europe on your side. So Germany tells Austria that, like, hey, we'll help you in whatever way we can. This is the kind of infamous German blank check. Germany says, we're going to help you in any way that you can. But if you're going to go to war, you got to do it like right now. Like, we're talking about like maybe 2 or 3 days after the assassination max. But Austria waits a whole entire month before they actually address the assassination at all. And by that point, people are like kind of over it. They're like, the shine on this apple has worn off. We don't really recognize, we don't really have that same level of sympathy that we did a month ago. And so when Austria makes this list of demands for Serbia to meet that they know they'll never meet, and then promptly declares war on them, this is really what gets this massive world war machine a-rolling. So let's talk a little bit about how that actually happens. So, again, a lot of why the decisions that were made were actually made, we'll never know. I read this actually super interesting, this really interesting paper that this historian had written one time. And I know that doesn't sound interesting at all. I'm not setting it up for success, but I thought it was really interesting. And what he argued is, he said, we tend to describe the causes of World War I as militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism, along with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. And that's how we describe the causes of World War I. And he said, but in reality, none of those should have actually led to World War. And then he went in and he explained, kind of just debunked how every single one of those could have led to World War. He pretty much said that, these are the reasons why this should not have led to World War. And I think it really highlights the complexity of why this war started. The World War II, that's easy. We know why World War II started, right? The Hitler expanding out into other parts of Europe, invading Poland, right? It's pretty cut and dry why World War II happened. World War I is not World War II. It is complex, it is confusing, and the reality is that we really will never know why the countries that made the decisions that they made actually made those decisions. We'll never know, okay? As this guy put it, this historian put it, he was like, there were decisions and deals that were made behind closed doors, and we are never going to know what happened during those conversations. We're just not. And so we had to kind of go with what we have. But I say all that to say that this is a really, really complicated war, and the reason why it started is really complicated, and it's complex. But understanding that complexity and recognizing that complexity is all part of just like doing history really well, right? Understanding history really well, not just relying on these kind of like really, really small talking points, but really kind of explaining the larger complexities of why this really complex historical event happened. Okay. So if you were to get like a LEQ or a DBQ on World War I, taking a step back and talking about how, all of these bigger, larger events aided the start of this war is going to show that you understand the complexities of it more than if you were to just say the Archduke was assassinated and World War I started. Okay. All right, I've rambled enough. Let's keep going. So, like I said, I ramble a lot with World War I. I really, really enjoy talking about this, but let's go. So, July 29th, Russia starts mobilizing troops against Austria to support Serbia. This really seems like a declaration of war. So, August 1st, just a few days later, Germany declares war on Russia. 2 days after that, Germany turns around and declares war on France, kind of preemptively. And then on August 4th, Britain declares war on Germany. This is mostly done because Germany starts mobilizing troops through Belgium, which actually breaks a treaty, or not a treaty, but pretty much when the Belgians formed their nation, the British said that if you are ever invaded, we will come to your aid. They were invaded by Germany. Britain came to their aid. So just like that, all of a sudden, boom, we are in the thing. Okay. And when this war breaks out, this massive war, when it breaks out, people are actually pretty excited. They're like, hey, we get to go to war for the first time since like really the Crimean War, which happened 50 years ago. We get to go to war. We get to go on this grand adventure, and we get to go, maybe make some money, and maybe we get to go get some souvenirs, and we get to have all these great stories with our friends, and it will be awesome. And the reality is that nobody could have ever predicted how destructive this war was and will be. They probably could have predicted. They probably could have figured it out if they really sat down and thought about the logistics of it, but they didn't. There was still the sense that the war was actually going to be over quick, and that it was going to be like a 2 or 3 month war, and then we'll have all the troops home by Christmas. And that just wasn't the case. And really, this is due to a few different things. One, it is due to the development of just very, very oppressive military technology. The biggest and baddest probably being artillery. The development of artillery was just unmatched compared to the development of other like land-based military technology. We're talking about artillery that can shell a target from a mile away with pretty good accuracy. By all accounts, this is modern artillery technology, and no one was really understanding just kind of how oppressive this was going to be. on top of this, we have like the development of more modern machine guns that are incredibly oppressive. You cannot charge at a machine gun. You just can't. You're gonna die. You also have the development of things like barbed wire, which just slows people down. Gases, mustard gas, chlorine gas, just again, very oppressive. And the big thing is that all of these pieces of technology favor defense. And so this is going to create the scenario that becomes so infamous with World War I, which is trench warfare, which we'll look at here in just a minute. So kind of what our two sides of the war look like. We have the Allies, which was the Triple Entente, is now the Allies. France, Britain, Russia, and Italy. Italy jumped ship right at the start of the war. Then we have the Central Powers, what was the Triple Alliance. Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire. And yeah, the Ottoman Empire is still in existence. It was crazy. So a few years ago, the Cubs won the World Series. I think this was back in 2016, 2017. My baseball history is pretty lacking. But you could actually say before they won that World Series, the last time they won the World Series was like 100 years prior. And the last time they won the World Series, the Ottoman Empire was still in existence. That's a really fun joke you could make before they won the World Series again just a few years ago. Anyway, the Ottoman Empire was still around. It had been nicknamed the sick man of Europe. It was really, really old school. It hadn't really adapted. It hadn't really industrialized at all. But regardless, here they were. Now, Germany's plan to fight this two-front war was the Schlieffen Plan. And their kind of goal was that they were going to defeat France very quickly, swoop back around, and then defeat Russia, which they kind of anticipated Russia was going to mobilize really, really slowly, which they were correct. Now, Germany is able to force France into a retreat, and it really looks like they were going to actually knock France out of the war really quickly. However, they were really not able to ever take Paris, and they get super, super bogged down. And they end up fighting pretty much over just a few square miles of land for the entirety of the war. Over the course of the next 4 years, each army would only move like a few miles. And this is the big issue with World War I, is that it's so destructive, and neither side really knows how to break this stalemate. So they just keep throwing bodies at the other side. Now, in the east and in the south, okay, the east being the Russian front and the south being the Ottoman, or I guess you would call it like the Asian Minor Front and the African front. It was a little bit more dynamic, but it was still very, very heavy on casualties. The Germans absolutely crushed the Russian army on 2 occasions. And by the end of just a single year of fighting, not even, there had been over 2 million casualties. It's absolutely bonkers. Now, eventually they're going to withdraw from the war in 1917. We'll talk about that here in just a second. But the Ottoman Empire was able to kind of, similarly to the Germans, hunker down and fight off the Allied forces for most of the war, again, causing absolutely massive casualties here. This is a really good example of kind of what this trench warfare looked like. It was muddy, it was gross, and it was incredibly unsanitary. And one of the big issues is that what ends up happening here is you have these kind of just like meaningless charges across no man's land to try to take ground. And what would happen, and this is a charge from the Battle of Gallipoli, one of the most destructive battles of the war, where millions of people lost, or thousands upon thousands of people lost their lives in these kind of fruitless charges. There's a really, really good movie that came out, I mean, probably back in the 80s, called Gallipoli. It's got Mel Gibson in it, and it's all about this battle. And I mean, man, it really does a good job of encapsulating really just kind of like the total lack of just like the total lack of like progress that was made in these engagements. Now, another front of the war that is important to talk about here is the home front. And World War I, one of the big defining features of it was that this was really, honestly, a total war, meaning that countries devoted the entirety of their economy, for the most part, to the war effort. And one of the things that you see is that you do see women actually entering into the workforce in higher numbers and taking a lot of those jobs that the men were doing. And this is going to lead to increased access to job opportunities and just opportunities in general for women following World War I. It's really no coincidence why in Britain, women gained the right to vote in 1919, and in the United States, women gained the vote in 1920. A lot of that has to do with World War I. Speaking of the United States, they officially declared war on Germany in April of 1917. This was done for a few things. Of course, we do know about the sinking of the Lusitania, although that was, again, one of the many reasons. In general, it was unrestricted submarine warfare that the Germans were doing, that the United States were just kind of like, they had told the Germans, you guys need to stop this or we're going to go to war with you, and the Germans didn't listen. But also, the United States had been selling military supplies and bases to the British for the entirety of the war effort. So it's not like the United States weren't economically involved in the war. Also, the Lusitania was carrying supplies for the war. Anyway, regardless, the bigger thing that brought it into the war is the Zimmerman telegram, where the Germans had reached out to the Mexican government and tried to get the Mexican government to declare war on the United States. With the promise of pretty much getting the entire Southwest, the American Southwest. Now the British do intercept the Zimmerman telegram and send it over to the United States. And this is really what brings the United States into the war, more than the sinking of the U.S. Lusitania, or more than the sinking of the Lusitania. Although the Lusitania spoke to the larger problem of unrestricted submarine warfare. Now the war will end in 1918, and this is mostly due to the fact that Germany had been really running low on not only supplies but also morale. I mean, the United States gets involved a year before the war ends, and think about, God, how demoralizing that has to be for these German and Austrian and Ottoman soldiers hearing about these thousands upon thousands of fresh troops who haven't been in the trenches for years, who haven't experienced the death of everybody that they know, who haven't experienced gangrene and starvation and sickness, who haven't experienced this absolute destruction. I mean, how demoralizing is that like now they have to fight, these bright-eyed and bushy-tailed American soldiers. It was just so demoralizing, and so the Germans do surrender in November of 1918. And this brings us to the end of the war and the Treaty of Versailles, which is probably one of the bigger kind of effects when we're looking at the effects of the war. One of the bigger effects that we need to talk about here. So first of all, the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles is really a big colossal error on the part of really everybody involved. There was really no way that this was going to work out well for anybody, because people were so upset with how destructive this war actually was. And a lot of people looked to Germany as the chief cause of the war. And so they get stuck with a lot of different stuff. First of all, they have to pay the entirety of war reparations, which means they have to pay off the entirety of the war debts. They have to accept the war guilt clause. Which is just absolutely, pretty much says like, hey, the war was your fault. It's, again, incredibly demoralizing. And in general, it just really absolutely neuters the Germans. The German state is a shadow of its former self because of the Treaty of Versailles. And a lot of German citizens are like, the war never even made it to German soil. How did we lose this? A lot of Germans looked at the government as being responsible for the war actually ending against the Germans. And so all of this is going to lead to just bitter resentment. Now, in general, the Treaty of Versailles largely redrew the map of Europe, with some countries being created, especially in Eastern Europe. And we can look at this a little bit more during the CRAM finale. I'm going to keep moving on real quick just because of lack of time. So one of the things that really brings the Russians out of the war is the Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution, which is kind of this very slow burning thing. It starts with really in the early 1800s, and is going to kind of build up steam throughout the 1800s and into the early 1900s. Russia really refuses to modernize. They refuse to accept any sort of liberal ideas and ideology. And all of this is going to lead to several different kind of like boil overs of like kind of pre-Russian revolutions. Okay, so like Bloody Sunday, for example, is a really good example. This was a peaceful protest in St. Petersburg that ended with the military firing into the crowd. And you know, all of these little smaller events is going to eventually lead to the Revolution of 1917, or the March Revolution, which does see Tsar Nicholas II being ousted, abdicating the throne, and a provisional, more liberal government being established. Now, as we all know, eventually what will happen is that the Communist Party, led by Vladimir Lenin, will take over and will eventually oust the provisional government and establish itself as the new government for Russia. This takes place during the November Revolution. Eventually, or right after the November Revolution, a civil war breaks out, and this civil war will eventually end with Lenin and the Bolshevik Party being in power. All right, that was a really quick overview of the Russian Revolution. Again, we can cover this more during the CRAM finale. All right, let's quickly talk about the interwar years. So looking at the interwar years, there's a few things that we really need to focus on. The first of all is that World War I had massive impacts and repercussions for the people of Europe. The biggest being that so many people died, and it was just a whole entire generation of young men are dead, gone. That is your politicians, that is your artists, that is your economists, those are your inventors, those are your business owners, right? They're dead, they're gone. And that's going to be massively disruptive for European society. On top of that, you also have this general just like fear of like, we can never let that happen again. That was terrible. And that is going to also have a really huge kind of like ripple effect on how people view themselves and also view what governments are allowed to do, which we'll see when we talk about appeasement. Now in Germany, we see the establishment of the Weimar Republic, which is a reactionary government following the abdication of Kaiser Wilhelm II. It is a liberal government that is largely ineffective. Germany also deals with hyperinflation because of the growing war debt. This is probably the worst case of hyperinflation that we've ever seen in history, where Germany, the Weimar Republic, literally prints out money. Now we know this is not an adequate way to solve your economic problems. And we, to the point where we have, one US dollar is worth something like millions of Deutschmarks. It is just incredibly bad and incredibly economically destructive. The United States is going to embrace isolationism. Britain is going to kind of be caught up dealing with their crumbling overseas empire. And then things are even going to be compounded even more with the Great Depression, which starts in the United States with the collapse of the American stock market, but it spreads very quickly to Europe. And a big reason for that is because the United States, following the end of World War I, they were pretty instrumental in helping Europe rebuild, and they had given out a bunch of loans. Well, the stock market crashes, the United States calls in those loans, and Europe can't pay them back. So we see this massive spread of the Great Depression into Europe. So the Great Depression really is something that a lot of people kind of think about, think only about the United States, having to do with the United States, but it absolutely impacts Europe in a major way, in major ways. Really, it just allows for really conservative reactionary governments to be established, and we know this happens specifically in Italy, Germany, Spain, and Russia, with the rise of totalitarianism. And totalitarianism is one of the big things that kind of comes to represent the 1920s and the 1930s in Europe. We have seen kind of two forms of totalitarianism. We see fascism and we see communism. And I gotta say real quick, in terms of communism, Lenin's brand of communism, Vladimir Lenin's brand of communism, probably wouldn't have fit this totalitarianism brand of communism. But certainly when we see Stalin take power, Stalin 100% embraces totalitarian communism, whereas Lenin really didn't do that much. In kind of comparison to fascism, fascism is always totalitarianism, right? Fascism is always power by a single ruler or a single ruling party, whereas communism is a little bit more complicated. But we know that fascism does take hold first in Italy with the rise of Benito Mussolini. Mussolini was kind of this eccentric writer and politician and speaker who, Italy is going through a terrible economic crisis, just like really the rest of Europe. And Mussolini is able to kind of talk his way into power. It's really pretty interesting. In a really, really scary kind of way. He pretty much just walks right in and with his band of brown shirts, his kind of personal army, and he walks in and he says, "Hey, can I be in charge?" And the Italian government was like, "Sure, I guess." And there he goes. But of course, we know that Nazi Germany is going to be the most infamous of the fascist states and really totalitarian states of the 1930s and 40s. So the Weimar Republic was a massive failure. It really did nothing to alleviate the problems that the Germans had with the Treaty of Versailles. And the Nazi Party was really one of lots of different parties that emerged at that time that were really angry with the actions of the Weimar Republic, or the lack of action by the Weimar Republic. Now, Hitler was a World War I veteran. In fact, he got injured during World War I. And he is going to kind of slowly rise up the ranks of the Nazi Party. And they are really going to appeal to those people who are out of work, those people who are homeless, those people who are really jaded by the outcome of World War I. And eventually, with the Beer Hall Putsch, which was this grab for power by Hitler and the Nazi Party, in which he ends up in jail for a few months, they become this really, they go from a very obscure small political party to a national, on center stage political party because of this the Beer Hall Putsch and Hitler's book Mein Kampf. The Nazi doctrine, I think we all kind of know a little bit about. This is something we most of us have probably studied before, but we know they are highly nationalistic. We know that they favor a strong political or a strong leader. In this case, it would be Hitler. But the Nazi Party really could have favored Hitler. Envisioned that after him there would be another Führer or leader, and also incredibly not only anti-Semitic but also really anti anybody who's not this particular type of person, right? They were very, very anti Romani. They were very, very anti Polish. They were very anti really anybody who wasn't Germanic. Now, Hitler is able to consolidate power again, mostly by working his way up through the ranks. The Nazi Party gets elected to the German Reichstag, or the German Parliament. After the president Hindenburg, president of the German president, dies, Hitler is able to kind of slide in and really start to consolidate power for himself. This kind of comes to a head with the Night of the Long Knives, in which he is able to arrest and execute all of his major political opponents. Now, of course, one of the key things that we learn about with World War II and Nazism is anti-Semitism and the Holocaust. This definitely starts in the 30s. This is something that is slowly but surely ramped up throughout the 1930s. It kind of comes to a head with Kristallnacht, which takes place in 1938, also called the Night of Broken Glass. That's what it stands for, or means in German. Excuse me. This was a really, this was a targeted action by the German government to oust Jewish peoples out of major cities into sections of the city, not only sections of the cities, but oust them from major cities and into eventually first work camps and then eventually concentration camps. Probably the largest targeted act of violence, or first largest targeted act of violence against Jews by the Nazi Party, for sure. This has been building up. This had been something that this rhetoric, this anti-Jewish rhetoric, had been something that had been building up for years at this point. And it's called the Night of Broken Glass because of the destruction that was caused. If you've ever seen the movie Schindler's List, the opening scene showcases the Kristallnacht and kind of this level of destruction that the Nazis caused. And then, of course, the Soviet Union, we see Stalin take power in 1924. He establishes totalitarian communism, where he rules as pretty much a communist dictator, and absolutely brutally works to modernize the Soviet Union, killing millions and millions of Russians along the way. All right, so we are going to very, very quickly work through World War II. Again, most of this stuff we probably covered in the past. This is definitely the most well-known topic of this period, of this class anyway. So we'll move kind of quickly through here, and then we'll get out of here. All right, so we know that World War II, unlike World War I, had pretty simple origins, right? World War II started due to the fascist aggression of not only Italy, but also Germany. In 1933, Hitler withdraws from the League of Nations. In 1935, he starts building up his military. In 1936, he marches into the demilitarized zone of the Rhineland. In 1938, he totally absorbs Austria. And then by the end of 1938, he starts annexing parts of Sudetenland, which is part of what was Czechoslovakia at that point. And so the Allied powers, they choose this idea of appeasement. Now, appeasement was just letting Hitler do whatever he wanted to avoid a world war. However, the kind of big breaking point here was the invasion of Poland in September 1st, 1939. And this was the big breaking point. We see Britain and France both declaring war on Germany as soon as this happened. Hitler utilizes the Blitzkrieg, or lightning war, to pretty much conquer the entirety of Poland in just a few days. And then in the spring of 1940, he institutes the second Blitzkrieg, which was aimed at France, and he was able in just a few months to conquer the vast majority of France. He also starts the Battle of Britain, which was a series of air attacks and air battles, bombing or air runs targeted at Britain in an effort to weaken them. Again, because Hitler, kind of like everybody else who's thought about invading Britain, knew it was a bad idea. Now, eventually, Nazi Germany is going to look at invading the USSR. And this is something that Hitler thought was going to be pretty easy to do. And he ends up getting incredibly bogged down. The Germans get incredibly bogged down. The Battle of Stalingrad. And this battle, one of the probably most destructive of the wars. The Russians throw absolutely everything they have at the Germans. The Germans throw everything they have at the Russians. And it is just incredibly destructive. Millions of people die. incredible massive loss of life and also of resources. Now, the United States is going to get involved in the war in 1949 after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And this is where we see the establishment of the big three, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin. And they realized kind of early that like Europe is the priority, then we're going to worry about the Pacific and Japan. And this is where we get Operation Overlord, which becomes known as D-Day, the Day of Days. This is where we see the massive invasion of France by the Allied forces. They were able to establish a new front in France. Massive losses for the Allies, but it works. And when they establish this front, that's when the Allies start going on the offensive. Now, probably one of the most defining things of World War II is the Holocaust. We know that this is the systematic killing of those that the Nazis saw as undesirable. This, of course, included the Jewish peoples, but it also targeted Romani, Poles, those of different genders, of different sexual orientations, the mentally and physically disabled, anybody that the Nazis saw as undesirable. 12 million people were killed as a result of the Holocaust. Half of those being those of Jewish faith. Incredibly destructive, incredibly, just absolutely altering, history altering. Not only, of course, for the Jewish peoples, but for world history in general. Something that we can talk way more about this during the CRAM finale. If we need something, we need to review more. Now one of the big kind of things that happens towards the end of the war is the Yalta Conference. And at the Yalta Conference, this is really where we see the big three talking about what's going to happen after the war is over. Because it's kind of clear that the war is going to end sometime soon. This is where we really see the establishment of the Soviet bloc, or the Iron Curtain, as it becomes known, in Eastern Europe. And we'll talk more about that with Unit 9 and the development of the Cold War. But in May 8th, 1945, war ends in Europe, and then just a few weeks later, war in the Pacific also ends. And after World War II, we see really the development of only two superpowers, right? The United States being one, and then the USSR being two. Germany is divided up into Eastern and Western Germany, with the Soviet Union controlling Eastern Germany, the democratic countries controlling Western Germany, and the Soviet Union is going to gain a significant amount of territory in Eastern Europe. And we start to see a clear divide between the democracy of the West and the communism of the East. And another notable thing is the United Nations, which is founded in 1945. This was supposed to be a bigger, badder League of Nations. It's still in operation today. The big goal, promoting world peace, and more importantly than that, cooperation. And then last thing that we'll look at here is the Nuremberg Trials that take place right after World War II, meant to address the numerous war crimes and crimes against humanity committed by the Nazi Party, where we see dozens of high-ranking members of the Nazi Party either executed or sentenced to prison. Oh, okay, that was a quick one. We can review that in Unit 9. Unit 9 is going to be a little bit shorter as we wrap up the end of the content for this class, which is crazy. I know we ran a few minutes over, so for those that are still here, thank you guys for staying with us. Join the Discord if you haven't already. Go join Charlie in the Discord. I'm gonna have a kind of review session there, and a little bit of extra help session if you need it. Just go hang out, whatever you'd like to do. But that's it. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I will see you guys next week when we cover the very, very last unit. Very exciting stuff. I'll see you guys then. Take care.